Marvel has given us a lot of iconic weapons over the years. From Mjolnir to Cap's shield to Iron Man's armor, there have been a lot of them. However, heroes aren't the only ones with stacked arsenals. One of the most dangerous villains that I can think of is Norman Osbourne, aka Green Goblin. This billionaire businessman with a villainous secret is like what would happen if Batman were more of a psychopath. He has some of the coolest tech in the Marvel Universe. And with us getting another cinematic outing for the flying green dude soon in Spider-Man No Way Home, I figured that now would be a good time to rank some of his most dangerous pieces of kit. From firearms to pumpkin bombs to the goo monster he keeps in his back pocket, there are a lot of really iconic and potent instruments of pain in his armory. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it at number 10. Despite having all the flashiest, best gadgety gizmos in the world, as well as seemingly unlimited funds to craft them for himself, sometimes the best weapon to use against heroes and villains alike is a gun. As a well-known and largely despised businessman and sometimes politician, Norman Osbourne has a lot of enemies who will often make attempts on his life when he isn't in his goblin suit. As such, the dude is usually strapped at all times when he's walking around, understandably so. And he has not hesitated to use these standard guns for nefarious means. On more than one occasion, he's threatened J. Jonah Jameson with them, as well as fired off a few rounds at the Richards children in order to try to teach them a lesson. Pointing guns at children, Norman? Seriously? That might rank up there as one of the most evil things the dude has ever done. Well, okay, he has done worse things, but still, it's pretty bad. Now, these might not be the most fantastical or really on-theme weapons for the Green Goblin to use, but sometimes keeping it simple is all you really need. You know, a lot of people take comfort in routines, but what if someone used a part of said routine to attack your sanity? Well, that's exactly what happened to Peter Parker when the Green Goblin managed to slip him a tube of hallucinogenic toothpaste? Seriously? That's a thing? Man, comics can get weird sometimes. During the Revenge of the Green Goblin story arc in the early 2000s, Osborn hatched a scheme to try to take down Spider-Man by breaking him down mentally. How? By sending him a tube of toothpaste that makes him see the Goblin not only in the mirror, but in his dreams as well, subtly controlling him. It also served to dull his senses, specifically his spider sense. First seen when he almost swang straight into a construction crane while out swinging, something you would pretty much never be at risk of doing because of his Peter tingle. Will we ever see this dastardly scheme on the big screen? All signs are pointing to no. It's probably the most ridiculous thing Goblin has ever tried, but hey, it's a fun one regardless and actually made for a fairly fun story to read. Speaking of ridiculous weaponry in the Goblin's arsenal, we've got to at least touch upon the infamous toy frogs. What? Never heard of the Green Goblin's toy frogs? Maybe that's because he doesn't exactly use them that often. Appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 17, which you're actually going to be seeing quite a bit of in this video, Goblin used these while Spider-Man was swinging around a ballroom, hoping to impress the people below. From backstage, Goblin lobbed a frog out at him, and the electrically charged amphibian managed to snap the wall crawler's web, dropping him onto the ground below. Though being the smooth webhead that he is, he managed to tweak what he was doing and made it look like it was all part of the act, much to the chagrin of Goblin. Not entirely sure why Goblin was so hell-bent on embarrassing Parker, as opposed to, ending him. But hey, he at least managed to snap his webbing, which is no small feat, given the tensile strength of the stuff. Also, why frogs? Are frogs related to goblins? Do goblins live in swamps or something? My knowledge of the little green dudes is pretty limited to basically just Lord of the Rings and D&D, so if they do, let me know. I'm genuinely curious now. Keeping in line with the whole naming weapons after animals thing that we've apparently got going on right now, we have Green Goblin's razor bats, or mechanical bats, or Goblin Boomerang if you're nasty. These things are among some of the most iconic weapons in Goblin's arsenal, having been with him since his initial appearance in the comics. We've even got a version of them on the big screen in Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film. During the sequence in the burning apartment building, Goblin lobs a set of flying razor blades at Peter Parker. And while they don't look exactly like bats, it's probably safe to assume that that's what those are supposed to be. That all being said, let's face it, these weapons aren't exactly the most powerful pieces of tech that Osborn has ever developed for himself. They are literally just sharp things that he throws at people. That being said, they have, very rarely, been shown to be capable of doing other things than just cutting or piercing people. An early issue of The Amazing Spider-Man showed one being able to emit a black smoke that Goblin used in hopes of blinding the webhead while he was swinging around, which I have got to imagine would be a super useful thing to use on most heroes. Just maybe not Spider-Man, since he, has that whole spider sense thing going for him. That would probably make up for his lack of vision in a fight. At least, I'd imagine that would be the case. This might be one of the goofier looking weapons Goblin has ever employed, but it is actually pretty terrifying when you think about what it could do. And it's not just scary because it looks like a ghost, though that certainly does help. This is Goblin's asphyxiation grenade, aka the ghost bomb. Basically what it does is it forms a giant bag around its target, sealing them in airtight. Goblin then just simply waits until they pass out from the lack of oxygen, and then he does whatever it is that he wishes with them afterwards. He's used it on a few different occasions, including once on the Human Torch, which must have been extra terrible considering that fire kinda needs oxygen to keep burning. Now, just try to think for a moment what would happen if Goblin used this on somebody and then just pieced out and left them in there. You know how all plastic bags have the whole "keep out of reach of children" message on them? Yeah, it's to stop that from happening. And no, it wouldn't cause you to travel through time, despite what some death metal musicians might want you to believe.
We've figured out how to travel through time at the speed of regular time with plastic bags.
It could easily be one of the most insidious weapons in Goblin's array of dangerous devices, especially considering the fact that people can't seem to break out of it all that often. So getting stuck in one could be a death sentence for our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. However, its sheer absurdity lands it this far down the list. Something's gotta be lower down, because from here on out we start getting into the really dangerous stuff. Here we have Goblin's iconic Electro-Blast Gloves, which is basically just a pair of gloves that he can use to shoot out nondescript blasts of energy. Making their first appearance way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 14, these gloves have been presented to us in a few different ways visually. When they debuted, they kinda just looked like flames emitting from his hands. In other forms, they've been presented as being spark-like particles shooting out of his index finger. Regardless of how they look when he's using them, they seem to do the same thing, shocking their targets, inflicting damage on them, and often stunning them to a certain degree. Definitely starting to see a trend with Goblin's weapons. Seems he's a big fan of immobilizing his enemies in order to take them out in other ways later on. Very inefficient, but also super insidious, so I guess it works. Something kinda unique about this gadget is that Osbourne has designed it in such a way that he can use it even while he is out of his Goblin costume, dressed up in his civilian form. Though it only seems to function in this mode when used within touching distance, at least as far as I have been able to find. So I guess if he wants to use something in his civilian form that is a bit more subtle than just pulling out a straight up gat, he's able to at least shock them, provided that he can get right on up in their grill. There are a ton of perks to being a billionaire, even quite a few for being a multimillionaire, believe it or not. Seemingly, one of the major ones, at least for Norman Osbourne, is access to a fleet of walking death tanks, called the Kingslayer Tanks. These giant mechs were created by Osbourne with the help of funding from Countess Katerina Karkov, along with the labor of the entire country of Symkaria, which had just recently been enslaved and subjugated. Living in that country must really suck, between the civil wars and the constant enslavement. Anyways, these mechs come in two different forms. One that is capable of being driven by a regular old pilot, and one that is capable of self-operation, acting as a proper drone. And these things are no jokes. Just one of them required the combined might of both Spider-Man and Silver Sable to take it down. And it was only done so after Spider-Man webbed an energy cell from one of Osborn's glide cycles to it, effectively using that as a bomb. Imagine for a second what would happen if Goblin was able to unleash an entire legion of these things on a city. That would have to be an Avengers level threat if I've ever seen one. Maybe with Goblin popping up in No Way Home, we'll get to see a version of the Kingslayer in the movie. Would certainly be something that would keep Spider-Man busy for a while, even if there are multiple Spider-Men, like all the rumors seem to suggest. Also, here's something kinda neat about the Kingslayer tanks that you might not have even realized. In fact, it took someone pointing it out to me for me to even realize it. It seems that Osbourne planned to use these things for a little bit of guerrilla marketing, as it were. Because you see, he planned on selling these things off to the highest bidder, but they are all color-coded to the Goblin's color scheme. See the green and purple? That is iconically the Goblin. So it looks like the plan was when he sold it off to bidders to use in private armies or whatever, he wanted them to be, rocking the goblin colors as it were. Sneaky, sneaky, Osbourne. How could this list exist and not include Green Goblin's pumpkin bombs? Basically, these things go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. Now, talking about the pumpkin bombs is kind of difficult, at least as difficult as my job ever gets, as there isn't really one specific weapon called the pumpkin bomb. In reality, these pumpkin balls are really just a housing for a multitude of different munitions. First up is the typical bomb. Not a lot to say about this one. It goes boom, people around it go bye-bye. It's about as simple as it gets. Next, though, is the stun bomb, which is continuing Goblin's love of incapacitating his enemies. This one explodes and sends out a concussive shockwave to try to knock out its targets, and it's often pretty effective at it. There are also hallucinogenic bombs, which explode into a cloud of gas that is specifically designed to cause all who inhale it to start seeing things, driving them temporarily mad, which honestly sounds a lot more reasonable than trying to get everyone to use his special toothpaste. So far within the movies, we've largely just seen the Goblin utilize his explosive forms of the pumpkin bombs, which is understandable. The Raimi version of Goblin has a whole suit to do dastardly things with, so no need for everything to be centralized around the orange spheres. Still though, it would be cool to see these different kinds of pumpkin bombs in No Way Home. At the very least, let's see the hallucinogenic bomb. Just imagine watching Tom Holland freaking out because he starts seeing things again and thinks that Mysterio has somehow returned. Could make for an interesting moment. What is more iconic than Goblin's pumpkin bombs? Why, his glider, of course. What is the Goblin without his glider? This might just be the piece of his kit that is the most definitively him. However, it might surprise you to learn that it didn't originally start off as a winged glider. In fact, when it first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 14, it was actually Goblin's flying broomstick. It basically just looked like a rocket that he rode on. It wasn't exactly the most impressive device. Luckily, Osbourne pretty quickly started improving on his design, debuting the Jet Glider only a few issues later. Eventually from there, it moved on to the Jet Flyer, and then the Goblin Glider that we all know and love. Now, this thing is not just a device that he can use for soaring through the clouds, though it definitely handles that with aplomb. Nope, it is basically a mobile platform for Goblin, operating as a sort of flying armory, with all of his other gizmos and gadgets stored on board the glider when they're not being worn on his fancy utility belt. It is also often very, very sharp. Some versions are shown to have razor-sharp wings, while others feature large spikes or blades protruding from the front, which Goblin uses by literally ramming into his enemies. However, as we all know, this can and has backfired on him in the past, such as when he skewered himself with his own glider at the end of Raimi's first Spider-Man film, ending his life. Allegedly, as this version of the Goblin seems to be making another appearance in No Way Home, seemingly ignoring the fact that he turned himself into a goblin kebab the last time that we saw him. I'm sure there'll be some sort of explanation given, but it's still a bit odd. Either way, I for one am very excited to see the glider make its big return to the silver screen. Alright, so in fairness, this might not necessarily count as a weapon per se, but how could I not include the Carnage Symbiote as the most dangerous entry on this list? It's flippin' Carnage! That's right, at one point in the comics, Norman Osbourne bonded with the Carnage Symbiote, becoming a twisted, bloodthirsty version of the Green Goblin. Though I guess he'd be the Red Goblin in this case, because, Carnage is all red and stuff. While using the Carnage Symbiote, Goblin's entire arsenal got not just an aesthetic makeover, making them all appear to be significantly more demonic and just all around more badass looking, but many of them also have additional abilities. For example, his pumpkin bombs were able to talk for some reason, which is creepy as all get out, and when they came into contact with their target, they would latch on, sticking to them like goo, before of course exploding into a massive fireball. Even his glider got an upgrade, this time being wreathed in flames, along with razor-sharp wings. It's truly the most terrifying version of an already kinda scary glider. Honestly though, you could say that about Carnage Goblin in general. I mean, this is the combination of a homicidal alien symbiote and an egotistical, power-hungry billionaire genius. Goblin might be the only person bonded to Carnage that is more horrific than Cletus Cassidy. Cause seriously, as you've seen throughout this list, this dude is capable of some truly terrifying stuff. So when you add in the addition of a symbiote, people better watch out. Hey there everybody, I'm John Algetz, I'm the guy who made this video, and I want to know what you think. How would you rank Green Goblin's weaponry? Any that I didn't include that you would add? Let me know in the comments below or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos just like this in the future.